For Bookish Minds, Season 05, Episode 07, joining us on our journey through Daniel Goleman's insightful book, Focus, we asked a profound question. What if the biggest obstacles to our growth are the things we simply can't see about ourselves? Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today, we're plunging headfirst into a really fascinating and, let's be honest, sometimes uncomfortable topic, our blind spots. You know, these personal and collective sort of deceptions that can subtly, or maybe not so subtly, hold us back. We're going to dig into Goleman's focus and pull out some really powerful nuggets to maybe shine a light on these hidden corners of our awareness. So let me ask you, our listener, have you ever been just completely blindsided, maybe even floored by how someone else sees you, especially when it felt totally different from how you see yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's an almost universal experience, isn't it? That sort of jolt of realization. Or maybe sometimes it's a confrontation where you find out about a trait or a behavior you had like zero idea about.
Yeah.
We all have those times when we kind of lose it maybe or act in ways that aren't exactly our best selves. But here's the real challenge, and the research Goleman highlights really points to this. If nobody tells us, if no one's brave enough, well, we often just keep going that way, completely unaware of the impact.
That's a bit scary, isn't it, living in that bubble? Do you have an example, maybe, something that really brings this obliviousness to life, maybe from, say, the corporate world?
Yeah, definitely. Goleman shares a great, well, maybe not great, but a very telling example from a California tech incubator.
Yeah.
The executive running it, she had this fantastic policy, no jerks allowed. Sounds ideal, right?
Sounds perfect.
Yeah. But despite this rule, she had this chief tech officer who was, well, by all accounts, a massive bully. I mean, technically brilliant, sure, but he'd freeze people out, play favorites, just create a pretty toxic environment.
And the really wild part, for me anyway, it was his complete lack of self-awareness about it. Like, he genuinely didn't see himself as a bully at all. And if you tried to point it out, his reaction wasn't, oh, really? It was anger or shifting blame or thinking you were the problem.
Right. It's like holding up a mirror to someone who refuses to believe it's their reflection.
Exactly.
And the consequence of this blind spot. It's a really powerful lesson. The CEO eventually confirmed they had to let him go. And the core reason, he just couldn't change because he couldn't even see the behavior others saw so clearly. So this isn't just like an interesting story. It shows how a lack of self-awareness can literally cost you your job, damage relationships. It's kind of the ultimate invisible career killer.
Okay, so if these things are invisible to us, how on earth do we find them? Is there like a reliable way to check ourselves?
Well, there is something Goleman points to as pretty effective.
Yeah.
The 360-degree evaluation. Think of it like a truth serum for your self-perception.
Okay, how does that work?
Basically, you rate yourself on a bunch of different behaviors, different traits. Then you get maybe a dozen or so people you trust, who know you well, to rate you on the exact same things. And crucially, their feedback is anonymous.
Anonymity is key, I bet.
Absolutely. It allows for honesty.
And the real gold is in the gap, right, between your rating and theirs.
Exactly. That gap between how you see yourself and how others rate you. Well, Goleman says it offers one of the best evaluations you can get anywhere of your own self-awareness. It's a pretty direct look at how you actually show up.
Okay, that makes sense. A structured way to get that outside view.
And what's really fascinating when you look at the data from these 360s is this intriguing link between self-awareness and power. The findings consistently show like relatively few gaps among lower-level employees. Their self-perception is pretty aligned with how others see them. But the higher someone climbs in an organization, the bigger that gap tends to become. It's almost like self-awareness kind of erodes with promotions.
Huh. So why is that? Is it just that people are afraid to tell the boss the truth? Or is something else going on?
That's the big question, isn't it? One strong theory, this power paradox, suggests that as people rise, the circle of people willing or maybe courageous enough to give honest feedback just shrinks.
People start managing up, telling the boss what they think they want to hear.
Precisely. And then, of course, you have some leaders who might just deny their shortcomings, or maybe they genuinely can't see them, even if told. So whatever the reason, you end up with these tuned-out leaders, as Goleman calls them, who see themselves as way more effective than their teams do. It can lead to a kind of, well, cluelessness, maybe like a character out of The Office, you know?
Right. That makes sense. So the 360 is one tool for getting that crucial outside perspective. It really leans into that idea of seeing ourselves through the eyes of others. It makes me think of that Robert Burns verse, oh, that the gods, the gift would give us to see ourselves as others see us. People have wanted this for centuries.
It's a deep human longing for sure. Although W.H. Auden had a slightly more cynical take.
Oh.
He suggested that to love myself, we sort of curate our self-image. We conveniently forget the unflattering stuff and really focus on the admirable things we've done. And he added, we do something similar to craft an image in other people's minds so they may love me. It's a kind of mental PR campaign, maybe unconscious.
Huh. A mental PR campaign. I like that.
But then the philosopher George Santayana brought it back around. He pointed out that what others think of us wouldn't matter much, except that once we know it, it so deeply tinges what we think of ourselves.
Ah, so their view shapes our view.
Exactly. Social philosophers call it the looking glass self, how we imagine others see us. Our sense of who we are actually develops through social interaction. Others act as mirrors. It boils down to, I am what I think you think I am.
Wow. Okay, so that's the theory. But how do we actively do this? How do we cultivate that looking glass? Bill George's Authentic Leadership Development course at Harvard Business School seems relevant here. It's apparently incredibly popular.
It is. And George has this great quote about why. We don't know who we are until we hear ourselves speaking the story of our lives to someone we trust.
Speaking our truth out loud.
Yeah. And to help with that, he created these True North groups. They're small, intimate, very open groups, a bit like 12-step meetings maybe. They're designed as a safe place where members can discuss personal issues they do not feel they can raise elsewhere, things they might not even tell family. It's about that deep self-revelation, finding your inner compass by sharing your unfiltered story. It helps bring clarity.
That sounds incredibly powerful. Finding your truth by sharing it.
And it's not just seeing ourselves differently. There's also this other angle Goleman brings up, hearing ourselves as others hear us, which we often don't do very well.
Hearing ourselves, like our tone of voice.
Exactly. There was this fascinating study reported in the journal Surgery. It looked at surgeons' tone of voice. Researchers analyzed brief, like 10-second clips from recordings of surgeons talking to patients. Now, half the surgeons in the study had been sued for malpractice before, and half hadn't.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
You probably do. The finding was stark. The voices of the surgeons who had been sued were rated far more often as domineering and uncaring.
Wow.
Think about it. A patient listening to a surgeon explain risks and technical stuff is already anxious, right? Highly sensitive to emotional cues. So that tone of voice, predicting lawsuits, likely points to a perceived lack of empathy, a lack of concern.
That's incredible. And it lines up with other research too, doesn't it? Like how feedback is received.
Absolutely. There's research showing if you get negative performance feedback, but it's delivered in a warm, supportive tone, you actually feel pretty positive afterwards.
Right.
But flip it, get positive feedback like great review, but delivered in a cold, distant tone. You end up feeling bad, despite the good news.
So our tone carries huge weight, often more than the actual words.
Immense weight. So the suggested fix in that surgery article, give surgeons audio replays of their patient conversations. Let them actually hear themselves. And then coach them on how to communicate empathy and caring through their voice. Basically, help them hear themselves as others hear them. It's a direct attack on that auditory blind spot.
Okay, so these blind spots are clearly tricky for individuals. But what happens when this lack of awareness isn't just personal, when whole groups fall into shared delusions?
Yeah, that's when we get into the really dangerous territory of groupthink. And the consequences there, they can be enormous, catastrophic even. Goleman mentions the lead up to the economic meltdown, specifically those investment vehicles built on subprime derivatives.
Oh boy, yes.
There was this story of a finance guy whose job was actually creating these things, and someone asked him straight up, who would actually buy these? His answer.
Let me guess. Idiots.
Bingo, idiots.
And yet, smart people did buy them, lots of them. How does that happen?
That's the core of groupthink, isn't it? When that tendency to ignore warning signs, to ignore contrary evidence, spreads through a group and becomes a kind of shared self-deception, it's often driven by this unspoken need to protect a cherished belief, maybe we're the smartest guys in the room, by discounting anything that challenges it. Shared blind spots leading to really bad decisions. It often starts with assumptions like, we already know everything we need to know, or we're too smart to fail.
Can you give some classic examples?
Well, Goleman points to a couple of heavy hitters. President George W. Bush's inner circle deciding to invade Iraq based on what turned out to be imaginary weapons of mass destruction. And of course, the financial players behind the mortgage derivative crisis. In both cases, you had these insulated groups of decision makers who just weren't asking the right questions, or they were actively ignoring data that didn't fit their narrative. A self-reinforcing cycle.
And Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel laureate, he did that study, right, on the financial advisors.
Yes, a fantastic illustration. A firm managing money for the super rich gave him 8 years of investment results for 25 of their advisors. Kahneman crunched the numbers and found, well, basically zero correlation between any advisor's results from one year to the next.
Meaning?
Meaning their success or failure was essentially random, no better than chance. The firm was basically rewarding luck as if it were skill.
Okay, that should have been earth-shattering news for them.
You'd think so. But Kahneman had dinner with the firm's top executives, told them his findings, and they just calmly carried on with dinner. He said the implications were quickly swept under the rug, and life at the firm went on exactly as before.
Wow. They just couldn't digest it.
That's Kahneman's point. Facts that challenge really basic assumptions, especially ones tied to livelihood and self-esteem, often just aren't absorbed. The mind sort of rejects them. It's a powerful example of a collective blind spot in action.
And this isn't just about corporate groups, is it? It plays out on a societal level, too. Goleman shared that personal story from the 60s.
Yeah, the civil rights movement one.
Right. He picketed a grocery store in his town for not hiring African Americans, felt like he was doing the right thing.
And he was, on that specific issue.
But then, years later, talking to an anthropologist, John Ogbu, he realized something about his own town's school system. His high school was all white, another was mostly black, a third was mixed. It was de facto segregation. And he admitted he had just never thought about it.
Right. He could see the store's bias, but the larger systemic pattern he was living within, totally invisible to him at the time.
It's a humbling reminder, isn't it?
It really is. Goleman notes that societal inequity often just fades into the background. It becomes something we habituate to rather than orient toward. We stop noticing. It takes real conscious effort to bring it back into focus. It's like a collective turning away, which, brings us to that famous better than average effect. Ask drivers to rate their skills.
Everyone's above average.
About 3/4, yeah. They think they're better than the average driver.
Which is statistically interesting.
Exactly. And here's the real kicker. The drivers who'd actually been in an accident were often more likely to rate themselves as better drivers.
No way. That's wild.
It is. And most people even think they're less likely than others to overestimate their own abilities. So we're generally not great judges of ourselves, and this collective bias makes these big societal blind spots incredibly hard to see, let alone fix.
Okay, so this all sounds a bit bleak. Blind spots everywhere. What's the solution? How do we fight back?
Well, the starting point is what Goleman calls metacognition. Specifically, awareness of our lack of awareness.
Knowing that we don't know.
Precisely. That realization is what can start to bring these buried truths out. He says, clarity begins with realizing what we do not notice and don't notice that we don't notice. It's about actively looking for what we're missing.
Okay, so step one is acknowledging the possibility of blind spots. What are some concrete antidotes?
Goleman suggests a few key things. First, actively seek out candid feedback from people you trust and respect. People who will tell you the truth. That's a vital source of self-awareness. It guards against skewed inputs or dodgy assumptions.
Makes sense. Don't rely only on your own view.
Second, deliberately expand your circle beyond your usual comfort zone. Build what he calls an ample circle of no BS confidants who keep you honest.
Get diverse perspectives.
Exactly. And third, think about diversification more broadly. Not just gender or ethnicity, but different ages, maybe clients, customers, people who see the world differently and can offer genuinely fresh perspectives.
There was that great example of challenging groupthink with a fresh perspective, the cloud computing company.
Oh, the Trust Cloud story, yes.
Right. Their servers failed, reporters are calling, competitors are watching.
Yeah.
And the default reaction in tech, the kind of ingrained assumption, is secrecy, right? Damage control.
Yeah, total lockdown usually. Most of the execs were stuck in that mindset, didn't know what to say.
But then one employee who used to be a journalist had a different idea.
She completely challenged that unquestioned assumption of secrecy, which was breeding groupthink, really. She suggested creating a website, Trust Cloud, and just being radically open.
Telling everyone exactly what was happening, how they were fixing it, everything.
Yeah, total transparency. And the result?
The problem basically evaporated. Customers felt reassured because they knew what was going on. Reporters lost interest because there was no hidden scandal.
It perfectly illustrates that quote from Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter. Sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Love that. Transparency is the antidote.
Exactly. Actively seeking out those different views, being open. That seems to be the most powerful way to counter these blind spots, whether they're our own or the ones we share in groups. It lets the truth come out.
What a fascinating journey we've taken today, from those personal blind spots that can really trip us up to the kind of shared groupthink that can lead to major disasters. We've seen how crucial getting those outside perspectives really is, seeing ourselves, hearing ourselves as others do. It's not always easy, but clearly transformative.
Absolutely. And these aren't just, interesting psychological quirks. They're really actionable insights about how we grow or how we fail to grow. The real challenge, I think, isn't just about what we know. It's about what we consistently, maybe unconsciously, refuse to see or hear about ourselves and about the world.
Yeah.
It takes courage, doesn't it, to really look in that mirror, especially when the reflection isn't quite what we expected or hoped for.
It really does. So for everyone listening, as you go about your day, maybe mull this over. What is one unexamined assumption you hold? It could be about yourself or about your work, your environment, something that might be waiting for a little bit of sunlight from an unexpected source. And how might seeking out that candid feedback, that honest reflection, actually change your path forward? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you'll continue exploring these crucial ideas and keep shining a light on your own potential blind spots.